Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your girl Apollonia Cross, and welcome back to Plan and Chat. Today, we are bringing on Narissa Harris, who is a mental health therapist, and I'm so excited to bring her on because we've had her before on Plan and Chat, but we wanted to do a part two since, if you guys caught the replay on that, mom life was kind of happening in that video, but it was great to have her on because she is also a young mom of littles as well. And so you guys got to see as we were getting into a deep topic on the reality of postpartum depressions and just how things really are. Now, today, we wanted to finish up with part two and really emphasize some of the main struggles that we as Black women really are facing, unfortunately, within the community, and how postpartum depression really affects us, as well as the mortality rate and health rates in regards to all those things too. So I'm super excited to have her on. And if you guys don't mind helping me welcome on Narissa Harris. Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
How are you? Thank you for having me back, child. I'm excited to talk about this topic. Listen,
Good.
I am excited. I don't listen. I can go on and on. So you let me know where you want me to start, and I could talk for days about this topic, especially for Black women, because it's really a disparity that we are facing. And I just think sometimes people think that we are being a little hyper vigilant, but I mean the facts are out there and it's real. So
Right. And I can't wait for you to actually really dive into all this because I know there's like information out there and
mhm.
starting to be a talking point, right? Which is amazing. We got to celebrate the beginnings of the wheel turning. But for someone who you've gone through this as your own personal experience, as well on top of your professional background as a licensed marriage and family therapist, like I feel like you have so much more of an in-depth truths that come from experience and professional that we can just get a great wealth of knowledge from. And I think this is going to be such an amazing topic. So I am ready. Just go ahead and
Okay.
ready.
Well, I like to start a little bit. I appreciate you bringing up my personal experience because I do like to kind of share why I'm passionate about this. Because I do have the professional background, but I'm truly passionate about it because I got literal lived experience with, my girls, my birthing experience. And that's kind of what really led me to it. And so I will say it'd be a slight trigger warning for anybody, watching. But it's real life. And I do think it's important just to really briefly touch on like why I'm passionate about this and why I kind of know like these are facts out there. It's just not just, us just pulling something out the sky. So I have two blessings of joy. They are 4 and 2, honey. And listen, they going on 40 and 25. But but they really are
blessings of joy first.
they are blessings of joy. And the reason, because a lot of people say my bundle of joy, and that's good, that's fine. And none of this stuff that I'm saying is any shade to how anybody, describes their kids. But for me and my household, these are blessings of joy, okay? Because when I tell you again, slight trigger warning, these kids were very intentional. And it took a really long time for me to have them. I had 3 miscarriages before I had my oldest. And then I had 1 in between my oldest and my baby. So when I was going through the pregnancy losses, as a whole therapist, I could not find any support. Like there was no therapist out there that had a specialty in pregnancy loss or miscarriage. And I found one person and she was charging, and I understand that you got to make a living, but in some kind of way, I'm like, that's almost profiting off of somebody's pain. And I just couldn't find any resources. And as a whole therapist, I know how to find me some resources, and there was nothing. Kaiser didn't have no classes on pregnancy loss, and they got the gamut of classes. Like, I just couldn't find anything. And so I also had a slightly, and I say slightly, and I think I water it down. And I think that's what we do as Black women, because it's like, well, my experience wasn't this bad compared to somebody else. But my baby heart almost stopped beating. Like I heard it during labor. And it was like a rush. It's very right. And I try to play it off like, well, she didn't, I didn't almost die. She didn't almost die. But it's like if you hear your baby's heartbeat almost stop, like literally slow down to the pace where, the nurse hand is shaking, they trying to like rush me to the emergency C-section, that's kind of traumatic, right? So that brings me.
Let's take kinda out. Let's call it what it is, girl. Okay, that's traumatic. Like
it was traumatic. It was traumatic. And it was traumatic. And so after all of that, I started recognizing some symptoms. Like I've always been anxious. Child, I ain't got no problem saying I'm the therapist with anxiety. Okay. I will worry until the wheels fall off. But certain stuff I didn't worry about. And so, I pride myself on just being, I'm a hood chick and I'm proud about that. You know what I'm saying? And so, girl, I'm like, listen, East Oakland bound. Okay. And I still can be professional. And it took me a long time to get to this place where this is who you're going to get. This is the therapist you're going to get. I'm not going to always pronounce things properly. You're going to get an ain't, you're going to get a go, and that's what you're going to get. And so I say all that to say, I've never had an issue with driving. I'm from the hood. Like we do 80 on the highway with no problem. You know what I'm saying? I grew up where I see folks just do donuts in the middle of the street. Like that didn't bother me. But I say all that to say, after I had my oldest, I noticed when I got in the car, I would be so anxious, like heart beating really fast, going really slow on the freeway. I mean, not dangerously slow, but I would be doing like a 55, in the slow lane in the 65 zone. That never was me, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started realizing I think I have postpartum anxiety, which a lot of people don't talk about. Like we do a lot of heavy focus on postpartum depression. It's all about postpartum depression. And it's not a lot out there about postpartum anxiety. And I like to tell people to see if you are having some of these postpartum symptoms. If they're truly postpartum, you need to see what was your baseline before you got pregnant. My baseline is anxiety, but I never was anxious driving a car. And so that is the difference right there for me. And so I started noticing, like, I got to kind of try to figure out how to work on this, have to kind of talk myself through. But it's a lot. It's a lot going into like after you have a baby, especially as a Black woman, and especially what we deal with in the medical field when we finally bring our baby to the other side of the womb, is what I like to say. We deal with a lot of postpartum and it looks different for us. So listen, child, I just went on a whole tangent about the hood, about anxiety, about driving cars. But the point is, I have experienced pregnancy loss and I've experienced postpartum anxiety and depression, but more anxiety. And because of my pregnancy losses, it made postpartum more complex. And because of my experience as a Black woman in this medical field and what we have to deal with and the disparities of Black infant and maternal mortality, it also made postpartum more complex. So there we go.
No, so don't the things real. Because that's all. I'm keeping it real because that's the only way that we can actually find healing. Because a lot of times we are so focused on trying to portray ourselves, and that's great. But sometimes you gotta keep it real and break it down to yourself, and that's the only way you can really heal and evolve. Who you're really supposed to be and actually be able to be fully loved and accepted and appreciated. So you talk about you from the hood, but ma'am, you are a licensed marriage and family therapist.
A whole one. And my thing is, it took me a long time to get to the place where I was like, you know what? I'm not doing this code switching thing no more. I'm not doing it. And I appreciate it. It's the best skin that I can be in because it's my authentic skin. And when I do work with women with postpartum, particularly Black women, it is what gets us to relate and talk. You know what I'm saying? If I'm coming on there, being extra proper, one, that's not me. That ain't never been me, right? And it's not going to help nobody be able to relate, especially when you're in the middle of postpartum and you just trying to figure out how to keep this child alive and not lose your mind because your whole world just been flipped upside down because you got a whole human to take care of. Like, that ain't no easy feat to deal with. And then when you are Black in society, I think a lot of people, I do think sometimes people make it seem like as Black women, we are like over exaggerating, but the numbers are out there. I have presented on this topic. Nationally, I have done research on this topic. I got my own lived experience on this topic. And I know too many people in my personal life that have experienced this. I know too many women who have almost died personally, though, not just women I've worked with. I know too many Black women who have almost literally died giving childbirth and or their kid almost died and was in NICU. Like, that is traumatic. And so when you are coming off of postpartum, these typical standards of, within 6 weeks, you'll see these symptoms. And then, within a year, you should be done with postpartum. Lies. If I almost lost my life or if my baby almost died, I am filled with adrenaline. And most of the time for Black women, we go into fight. We ain't feeding from no mode, right? And so my thing is, if I'm about ready to fight you to save my life, to save my baby's life, that is adrenaline rushing through your body. It's going to take you about longer than some 6 weeks. If you think about somebody that's a casualty of war or who've been in war, they're not going to calm down after 6 weeks. No. That's just not what's going to happen. It's going to take them a minute to come down off of that traumatic response. And that's the same thing that happens with postpartum. A lot of times I think we, especially as Black women, are in shock that we made it to the other side with our baby and we survived. That's why I call my kids blessings of joy, right? Because they are literal blessings, right? But it took a minute for me to be like, okay, like everything is okay. I didn't really want too many people touching her. I wasn't leaving her with too many folks. Like it, I kept her close because I had all those losses. Then I damn near lost her in childbirth. So it's like I'm holding her close to me because I'm anxious. And it takes time for your body to come down and realize, oh, I think I was just in a fight. And now I got to like calm my nerves so that I can kind of stabilize myself. Not to mention, let's stabilize these hormones. Like that's a whole...
Girl, that's a whole, so that's a whole nother thing. And it's such a process. It is absolutely such a process. There's not enough pills. It's a process. And I think we as women, especially as Black women, and how all the pressure we put ourselves under and also what society puts us under adds on to this postpartum anxiety and this postpartum depression. And without answers, we don't know what the heck is going on. No. And so we're just constantly trying to fix ourselves. I know, like literally, my daughter is 3, about to go on 4. And you and I have had this discussion before where I've had postpartum depression or experience. I am not one I don't like to necessarily go to doctors. But I finally recently started actually going to therapy. I'm like you said, I'm like, if there's a problem, I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make it happen. Like whatever I gotta do. And that's absolutely great because you do need to have that. And especially us as Black women, strong Black women, we're like, nope, I gotta make it happen. If anybody's gonna do it, it's gonna be me. I'm here to break generational curses. You need that. We're not saying don't get that, but you need help.
Right.
And I think that's a lot more difficult too for us because we don't want to feel like we're broken. It's scary to be vulnerable. And then especially depending on your support system, they don't talk about it. Then nobody talk about postpartum depression or anxiety. They're like, oh, you'll be okay. Like, and so you're like, okay and you're just struggling. And when you're not okay, you're really tripping out.
Yeah.
And this, from a biblical standpoint, as I'm a Christian life coach, is this is where that spiritual warfare
Yeah.
kicks in. And the enemy goes into overtime, getting you to believe something's wrong with you,
Yes.
your husband, something's wrong with your child, and it's not.
It's
Yeah,
not.
it's not. It's just you need support, you need help,
Mhm.
you need to be able to be vulnerable, process your emotions, eating healthy,
Yes.
doing the routines and things like establishing stability, establishing those things in the home. But we can do that if we do not have stability and security within ourselves.
Right.
As creators, we have to create that and work on creating that within ourselves first. So that way we can physically manifest that in our families, in our home, in our environments, in our communities.
Right.
And like what you're saying, it's difficult. And I didn't even realize that there's a difference between postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. You're right. We do
Mhm.
focus on postpartum depression because it's more talked about and more heard of.
Right.
It's also still such a new thing, right?
Mhm.
And then even with how do you understand the difference? That was one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about. If
Yeah.
you elaborate, especially with your professional background, what is really the biggest difference and how can we recognize the signs between postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression?
Well, you can have both. Um, and the funny thing is, ironically, there's not, it's a, I'm not going to get too much into the diagnosing because I don't want people watching this trying to go diagnose themselves. But I'm going to get into it though, just so that y'all can understand, but I'm not going to get into the technicalities, if that makes sense. And so you can have both, but you definitely need to consult with a professional because the way we diagnose this is not the classic way of like diagnosing somebody with like bipolar or depressive disorder or something like that. It's very different because it's just there's different criteria and some of it is not necessarily in the manual that we use. It's a little weird. But what I will say is you can have them together. You can have them during pregnancy. So a lot of people feel like, right, a lot of people feel like it happens after you have the baby, but you can have some of these symptoms prior to giving birth, right? But to focus on the after your baby is actually here, what I like to tell people, like either when I work with them individually or if they come to one of my workshops, is it's really about your baseline because a lot of the symptoms of postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety look like regular adjustment, right, to having a baby. So there's things like loss of appetite or eating too much, not sleeping a lot or sleeping too much, not able to keep up on your personal hygiene, feeling excuse me, girl, listen, that's me because I just had a baby, right? Feeling down or depressed, not having interest in doing the things that you used to do. Those are all the symptoms of postpartum depression, right? For me, and then impairing your judgment, right? Or being irritable, or they say angry, but for Black women, I changed the term to frustrated because, you know, we described as angry Black women too much, right? And
Right.
so those
Like
are the
if
same.
opportunity to
Right.
listen, or if you give her an opportunity to speak and you gave her the gift of listening, you would
Right.
really be able to get to the root of what's going on and help her.
Exactly. And so those are the symptoms of postpartum depression. What I tell people is, what was your baseline? Was you already a little irritable and easily frustrated? Did you already sleep a little bit too much? Did you already start losing a little bit of interest in doing things? If you were doing that before you had a baby and it's the same, then most likely you're just adjusting to having a baby. But let's just take a couple of them. Like impairment in functioning, eating or sleeping too much, and then like personal hygiene, right? let's say that you struggle with that prior, but now that you have the baby, it might be more, right? Like, has it increased? Has it gotten worse? And so one thing with personal hygiene and upkeep is, if you were somebody like before you had a kid, and I like to use hair for Black women. I know it's cliche, but listen, we be doing our hair, right? Like, whether it is the same style, but it's always looking kind of fresh, or whether we a Black woman that changes her style. For me personally, I'm somebody that changed my style a lot, right? One minute I might have my fro, child, the next minute I might have my little two braids. Today I got the two braids in the front and the bun. Next week I might have some singles, right? But when I had my oldest, I had my two braids. They were neat and they were well put together, but that's it. That's all I did. And that was not my normal template, right? So that shows a struggle with upkeeping my hygiene, even though it might not appear to the average person that it's a struggle, because it's like, oh, her hair is done. Like, it's neat. But that ain't what I used to do. And so I think for us as Black women, we need to pay attention to how are we functioning? Because if you knew Narissa, I don't just do my two braids. Like, maybe I do my two braids for a couple of days, maybe a week, even if I refresh them. But, most of the time you might see some cornrows and a little fro in the back. You might see some extensions. You might see a complete fro, a puff, but that wasn't happening. So my impairment was my impairment in functioning. So it's like the subtle things we have to look at to see where are things changing, how is she functioning? And then for anxiety, it's kind of similar, right? Not able to control your worrying more often about the baby than you should. The same thing with some irritability and a little bit of anger. But the big key is like not able to control the worry. And again, if you are somebody that worries, has your worrying gotten worse? Like, are you catastrophizing things, right? Which is basically, are you feeling like everything is just horrible? And like every thought that you have is like seriously the end of the world. Like, it's going to be something completely traumatic that's happening. If you're having a hard time controlling that amount of worry, that's probably a sign that you are in, the level of postpartum anxiety. And so for me, like I said earlier, it was the car. I never used to get nervous about driving in the car. I never got too nervous about getting up to 80 miles an hour, right? I still struggle with it now. I mean, don't nobody need to be driving 80 miles an hour anyway. Let's just give that disclaimer, okay? But I'm saying that stuff never made me nervous. And so my thinking was, oh my God, we're gonna have a car accident. Oh my God, this car is getting really, really close to us. And it's like, that car just merging. Girl, that car is really just merging over. Nobody finna stop and start doing donuts. They use their blinker. Like, why are you freaking out mentally? And that's because it was a little bit of postpartum anxiety. And so that's where my anxiety started getting worse. Feeling like if I left the baby, with one of the grandmas, something was going to happen. Would nobody be able to help the baby? Girl, both the grandmas is registered nurses. What you mean nobody going to be able to help the baby? You see what I'm saying? So it's like, these are the thoughts that are like impairing functioning, right? Stopping me from being able to get a moment to myself, because I'm scared to leave a baby with two registered nurses that are completely qualified and then raise several kids on their own. Right. So this is what I mean when I say, like, look at the baseline. And if your symptoms are worse than they were prior, you probably are tipping into some postpartum anxiety or depression or both, especially if it's around the baby.
Okay. Because I love that you brought up what was your baseline. And that's one thing that I always talk about with my clients. It's like, who were you before, right? What were the things and who were you before? And sometimes the lie that we or the enemy gets us to believe sometimes is the fact that now that I have kids, I can no longer be.
Yes.
Right. And that's absolutely furthest from the truth. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of, there are certain expectations to, and unfortunately, I think it's just like what you were saying, depending on what our life experiences are, depending on how we're taking into transitioning to motherhood, it is very difficult to try to get out of those spirals when
Mm-hmm.
we're feeling like, well, I can't do this anymore. And like I wouldn't have never thought about the whole your hair thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the simplest thing, and most of the time it's like my husband used to always tell me that, especially after I had my third. Well, he would always tell me this, but like with my daughter, my eldest daughter, he was always like, "You always in this bun. What's up with this high bun? Like, why are you in this high?" I'm like, "Sir, we got 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
You gonna get this high bun."
Yes,
And it's just gonna be what it is. I'm
it
doing the best
is.
I can. And
Yeah,
obviously we saying it jokingly, but
yeah,
depending on where we're at in a mental state, you can start to spiral and just lose
yes, yes. You can.
it. And
You can.
I think that's what you're talking about, is how we're actually affected by
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think that's one thing that's so tricky to really like. So when is it just, it is what it is, in comparison to like, no, we need to like seek help so we can
Yeah.
get better. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because as someone who was like, I fearing getting diagnosed because I didn't want to be put on medication,
Mm-hmm.
afraid to even be honest about what was going on. So in just trying to, I guess, shell myself in a sense, to mask, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there is a mom on there to where she's doing all the things, but she is secretly like, no, I know something's wrong, but I just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
How could you help her into making that decision to really like get help?
Yeah, I would say particularly, especially for like Black women, because you mentioned this earlier, like there's this pull for us to be strong and to hold it together and to like, you can do it. Even if we don't want to be part of that club, society has put us in that club unwillingly because, they don't look at us as human. Like it's this Black girl magic, it's, just all this Black excellence, which is Black excellence is cool, but the Black girl magic and even the excellence puts this bar so high that's like unattainable, and it's fictional and it's fake. And other women don't have to deal with this. You got to be strong. They can cry, they could boo hoo, and people, rub their back. Girl, you're going to be okay. Hang in there. How can I help you? How can I support you? A Black woman do that, and it's like, girl, get it together. You'll be okay. And it's like, no, she won't. And so, what I would say is, if there's a woman listening, particularly to, and this is not to exclude any other women, but I definitely want to name Black women because we are put in this trope of being strong and holding it all together, which can lead to nervous breakdowns and like losing it. If you are feeling internally like something is not right and you need some help, I would encourage you to get help. I know it's difficult because it's hard for us to find help that we can resonate with. There's also the fear of, if I'm fully honest, what's going to happen? Is somebody going to think that I'm not fit, and all of that stuff? That's like a rabbit hole. Don't
Yeah.
CPS involvement and all that stuff. That's a rabbit hole I would encourage you not to necessarily go down. Because if you are not at the point of harming your baby, hurting your baby, and you are just having a hard time, that is not a CPS report. Okay. Like, let's just make that clear. If you're just having a really difficult time, sometimes you might cry, even if you're crying in front of your kid. That is not a CPS report. Okay. To have a shed a tear in front of your child, that's not going, no. So I would say get some help. Advocate for yourself. If you are Black and you want a Black therapist, you can call your insurance company. You can specifically request that you want a Black therapist. If they don't have a Black therapist, you can use words like culturally competent, culturally sensitive, that have done cultural training.
Mm-hmm.
You can use those terms. And even when they give you a referral, if you get a therapist that's not Black, and you want to know if they are, culturally competent, so to speak. I don't think any of us are competent. I think we can be culturally humble and sensitive because we all can learn to be better, even Black therapists. But you can ask your therapist, like, what type of cultural training have you done? Do you have experience working with Black clients, Black women? And if they get defensive, that's your sign that that might not be the therapist for you. Because I think that's a valid question that any person of color can ask a white therapist. And if a white therapist is getting defensive, then you can just call your insurance company back and say, that person's not going to work for me. I need a different referral. You can also look on Psychology Today. A lot of times they have pictures of therapists in your area. You can kind of read their profile. That can give you an idea. But I would say to seek the help. I know sometimes it's hard to seek the help, but at the end of the day, postpartum seems very permanent, but it's temporary. And so you have to remind yourself of that and remind yourself that you need to be the best that you can be for your kids. And you can't be the best that you can be if you are not feeling your best. And you can't do it, like, you cannot do it by yourself. Like, that's really why they say it take a village. Like, you gotta have support. If you pray, child, pray and put on the whole armor of God, like real talk. But don't just pray and be like, I'm gonna pray about it and be done. Child, no. God supplied therapists, he supplied doctors, and you can pray for him to send you the right fit that can help you through this. But I would say get the help because it's needed. Listen, I'm a whole therapist, okay? And I got a whole therapist, okay? And no problem seeking out some support and some assistance because postpartum is rough.
Yeah. And I love that you acknowledge that, because that's the myth. People are like, well, you're a therapist. Why do you need a therapist? Like, ma'am, sir, you guys, like, I'm a life coach, but I still need a life coach when I need one. I still need a therapist when I need one because we're still human at the end of the day. Like, we are absolutely human. And sometimes, like, bringing in, Christianity, yeah, we need to pray, but everybody has their own spiritual gifts, right? Yeah. And sometimes when your spiritual gift is healing, it is very difficult for you to be able to use your own gifts on yourself.
Right.
Like, because our gifts are meant to be used to help others and not necessarily ourselves. Right. They are great and benefit to us. They can be, right? But we need, like, it's meant for others because we were placed here to be in service of others. But that doesn't mean that you don't get serviced yourself.
Right.
So you do need to humble yourself and open yourself up to receiving the help needed from someone that you trust. Definitely have and all the aunties, all the anointed oil, get everybody, the whole team, everybody. Okay. Do that for sure.
Yes.
But don't close doors that those prayers in God are opening for you to. Like the saying goes, there's a man in a boat about to drown and he's praying for, or a man about to drown and he's praying to God, help me, Lord, help me. One boat comes by, a man's like, hey, I can help you. He's like, no, I'm waiting on God. And then, so he's praying, God, help me. And then a man with a ship comes. He's like, hey, we can help you, right? Because it's a whole ship. And he's like, no, I'm waiting on God. Well, the man drowns. He's like, God, why didn't you have to try to help me? He's like, sir, I sent you a boat and a ship. What else you want?
What you want?
Right. There is the portion that God does. Yes. And then there's the portion that we do. And sometimes, especially if for those of who are very, very strong in their faith, and especially if you were raised very much in the church. Yeah. Give it all to Jesus. Absolutely. Not saying not to. Right. But we got to think the logical, intangible things we can do as well. The same exact for my realm in health and wellness. Like, yes, let's pray for healing from diabetes and overweight, all of these things, and getting better lifestyle. But we got to put in the work. You have to. It's just what it's faith takes action. It does. And that's I sometimes I feel like just like you said, we can get kind of lost and try
Mm-hmm.
to self-protect ourselves, be like, no, I'm just going to be okay. I'm just going to be okay. No, because eventually it's going to add up and that spiral is going to overload. And
Right.
then you're not going to be able to handle it afterwards.
Right. Right.
But yeah, so thank you so much for elaborating on that. We only got a little bit of time, but I would love for you to dive into some of the research that you were talking about that and yeah, so we could take so you guys we kind of passed a little note so we could stay on topic. She needs to go grab.
Yes.
So go ahead, girl, grab that charger. It's okay.
Girl, listen, I'm like, my charger low, y'all. I don't want the computer to die on nobody while I'm in the middle of talking. But I did do some research. You can keep asking me the question.
Yeah, so you've done a lot of research from your own experience. Obviously, you've interviewed, had family and friends
Yes.
talk about your situation. You kind of experienced some things, and you've also done your own research, and you have actual numbers that
Yes.
prove how much of a disadvantage we as in the Black community on that we have when it comes to getting and advocating for health and wellness, postpartum depression, as well as during, and the Black maternal mortality rate. And so share a little bit more about that, because I haven't done any research obviously on that in depth, but with my own experience, my third child, I had a weak cervix.
Mm.
At 21 weeks, I was already starting to dilate. And so I
Oh.
was hospitalized bed rest for 10 weeks, living in the hospital. And there was no answers. Like, they're
Oh.
like, yeah, we're just going to try to wait and see what happens. Got steroid shots and all of the things to try just in case. She came early. They get all the different doctors prepping you, chances of survival, all of the things. So we talking, how you mentioned trauma from, your heart stopping. Yeah, having to deal with trying to stay positive and happy because
Yeah.
you're carrying a child, but also having to come to terms with she may be mentally retarded. She may not survive if she's born.
Yeah.
All of this stuff, it becomes a lot. And then when the doctors have no answers,
Yeah.
like, so you can go down that rabbit hole too of all the research and all the things because there's just no answers. There's no help. It may be because the doctors either purely just don't know, or it
Right.
is lack of understanding and knowing about what's going on with our bodies and how like this can really why doesn't anybody have an answer? So anyways, long story short, share what it is, like the research that you found with these numbers.
Yes. So it's a lot, but I'll make it kind of brief. So I'll do the pregnancy loss and then I'll do like the postpartum numbers. And then hopefully I could tie it up to like make it make sense for you. But so with pregnancy loss, I found that Black women are 2 times more likely to have a pregnancy loss. They consider pregnancy loss. Well, technically, I interchange the phrases, but miscarriage is prior to 10 to 12 weeks, I believe. That's the term. And then pregnancy loss is, bless you. Pregnancy loss.
Girl,
It's okay.
that's a choke.
It's okay. Pregnancy loss is anything prior to 20 weeks, like that 10 to 20 week mark of pregnancy. And then stillbirth is after that, right? And so I broke those down because pregnancy loss or miscarriage were 2 times more likely. So in general, the population is 10 to 15%. Like the general population will lose a pregnancy, about 10 to 15%. For Black women, that turns into 20 to 30%. And it might not sound, it's double. And so it might not sound like a lot, but I like to give the,
that is a lot.
It is, but but sometimes people, when you get in the research world, they'll, some people may argue those aren't high numbers, but if you break it down to a room of about 10 people, with regular women, about 1, maybe 2 women would have had a miscarriage. But if you put 10 Black women in a room, then that goes to 2 to 3 people, 2 to 3 Black women in the room. And when I presented on this in my conference, there were Black women around. And literally, I wasn't asking nobody to say nothing, but the statistic came to life right in that moment. Because as I was talking, it was about 10 of us there. And I kind of was like, if it was, we were all in a room, probably one of us have had a miscarriage, maybe 2 or 3. And I said, I've had a miscarriage. And then literally women was just like, me too. And then another one was like, me too. And the statistic came to life there. But what makes it even worse is we're 3 times more likely to have a stillbirth or to die in labor. 3 times more likely. And so those numbers are staggering. It's really high. About 17 to 20% of women experience postpartum depression and or anxiety. I feel like the numbers, it's still hard to find the research, but given what we know, the papers that I have read and have found have said that the assumption is Black women's numbers are higher. But it's hard to test Black women with postpartum or to research because we don't want to talk to nobody. So if you call us talking about we finna do a research study, can you share some information?
Who did?
We ain't doing that. It's easier to gather that information prior to the birth, right? Because you can see what happens. It's kind of a little bit easier to do that in terms of like, how's your pregnancy going? In terms of like, unfortunately, this person lost this baby, because that's kind of like in your face. But with postpartum depression and anxiety, you got to report that. And you got to talk to somebody about how you feeling. And a lot of times we ain't talking to nobody, but I believe that we are 2 times more likely. So 17 to 20% of women have postpartum depression and anxiety. I'd be willing to bet some money that that's about 30 to 40% for Black women. Because if our numbers are higher in pregnancy loss and, infant mortality, it makes sense that our numbers are higher in postpartum anxiety and depression.
Man, absolutely. That's so sad. Like,
it really is.
It's sad in the fact that this is just medical and what is going on with bodies, right?
Yeah.
And then when you add to the fact, we haven't even gotten on the topic of just the effects of life, even within the community, and how many women in the Black community are more single moms.
Yeah.
Or just don't have a healthy and positive support system.
Yeah.
In comparison to other cultures. Let's, just keeping it real. Like, culturally, there is so much. And unfortunately, those generational patterns continue, not for a lack of desire to want better, but there's just a lack of support to go and get better. Because most of the time, like what we're saying is like, oh no, you get over it, you figure it out, just get up. Like, there's a complete dismissal, acknowledgement. And so again, it adds on to that strong Black woman, that armor, and to where I don't need nobody, I'm gonna do it all by myself. And that scarcity mentality. And it's not because they don't want help. The help just isn't there.
Right.
Like, within the community, it may not necessarily be there, even though it might be told, you got help. But when you look and start reaching out for help, it's like, oh snap, I really ain't got no help. Like,
right.
Or maybe you can't afford help.
Yeah.
And so the reality is like, nope, I gotta do it. I gotta figure it out. And again, it's just so sad. How so many people are unable to be serviced and get the help needed.
Right.
And it's not just financials, right? And it's just crazy. But
it is.
The numbers, like from the research, like 30% of miscarriages and stillbirths, like that's high.
Yeah.
That is extremely high. And
Right.
these are African Americans. Like, we live in a free country. We live and have access to healthcare, supposed to, right? Quality. Right. So for those who aren't able to get help, it's so frustrating, and
It
it's so
is.
sad. And it just breaks my heart hearing it. But
And I do want to say, sorry to cut you off, but I don't want to forget this part before we end. But I want to name that it is a cultural thing. One piece that I found in the research, it's not like socioeconomic. It's not if somebody doesn't have the money or doesn't have the funds. It's a cultural issue. It doesn't matter the woman's educational background. It doesn't matter how much money she makes. I mean, we know that with Serena Williams and Beyonce, and even Michelle Obama talked a little bit about her story, right? These are like high caliber women who still had struggles, either in fertility or childbirth, right? So I do want to name that because sometimes the challenge will be, oh, well, they always like to make it seem like, well, we ain't got the money or we ain't got the education. That's why it's the disparity. That's not what I found in the research. Like, the people that wrote, these research articles basically were naming, like how you had talked about a little bit ago, sometimes there's no answer. There's no reason. And the reason is cultural, right? Like, if there's a well-educated Black woman who makes a decent amount of money and she still is having this disparity, that's a cultural issue, right? So there was no difference between socioeconomic, whether she was low income, medium income, high income, high school diploma, no diploma, doctorate. It still was across the board. 3 times more likely with a stillbirth, 2 times more likely to lose a pregnancy. So I just want to put that out there.
That's crazy. That's really something to ponder. But thank you so much for sharing and coming on. I know you've got to get going, so we're going to make sure to.
I know. I could talk about this all day, honey, but I got to go get that youngest blessing of joy, child, because I ain't going to let them people charge me $2 a minute to come pick up my baby if I'm late. $2. Okay. But I really enjoyed talking about this. I did. And I really hope that it helps somebody out there when they watch it. And thank you for using your platform to just share more information about this, because it's something that women don't talk about. So I was really happy to talk about it in the first part. I'm really happy to talk about it specifically for Black women in this part. So just thank you for putting it out there, because it's something we need to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the real, educatedly hood. I like
Yes. That's me, honey. You see me in the street, I might be bumping T.I. and Nipsey Hussle. It depends on the day. But then I might need a little bit of, Kirk Franklin and Yolanda Adams to center me. It just depends, okay? So
and that's called unapologetically living in your truth. And how
listen, I'm unapologetically Black and I'm living in my whole truth, okay? So yes. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And thank you guys for catching this video. If you guys have any questions or would like to possibly work with Narissa or me, or just would love to just have questions, comments, whatever you guys want, make sure you drop that below and we will catch you guys on the next time. I'll also make sure to have links and things provided for her if you guys want to connect with her later. All right. So thanks again, Narissa, for coming on.
Thank you for having me. All righty.